1 minute ago, I spoke with the Chief of Staff, and he's indicated that 6 Special Forces soldiers have been lured to the site. They're on the ground now, and they're making their way to the crash site. They're probably about 30 minutes out. They had estimated it would take an hour to get to the crash site because of the dense jungle. And about 30 minutes has elapsed since. So we expect that they would be there in about 30 minutes. And then all the equipment necessary to extract people from that site would be available at that point in time, including the Omni helicopters. So we are hoping that in another 30 minutes, the soldiers will get to the site. We're keeping our fingers crossed. That's what the most information we can bring at this point in time to you. Now, tomorrow the United Nations Security Council will be considering the request from Guyana. And that meeting will take place at 3 p.m. We're extremely pleased that they have taken up this matter with this sense of urgency, and also that the United Nations Secretary General has sent to the Security Council the provisional measures announced by the ICJ. So clearly the entire Security Council will have available from the Secretary General the full ruling of the International Court of Justice and the provisional measures. And one of those measures, there are 2 measures, but the first one refrains Venezuela from, restrains Venezuela from taking any measure whatsoever that would alter the status quo on the ground. And the status quo is defined by the current border as established by the 1899 award. So we expect the Security Council to deal with this matter swiftly. Now, all of this came about largely because of the December 5th announcement by Maduro. But before I talk a bit about the situation and share our perspective on key elements of the Venezuelan strategy, I want to say a few words about us here in Guyana. Now, understandably, there's a great deal of anxiety among our people, particularly those who live in the Essequibo. We are a people who are not accustomed to war. We've been living at peace for centuries in this land. And so it's understandable when a belligerent power like Venezuela would threaten the existence of a significant part of our country. And we have to ensure that all of those people who have these misgivings, that we don't reinforce these anxieties by being glib, by being belligerent, by being sometimes purely unconscionable sharing Venezuelan extremist views that cause greater anxiety, and even sometimes fabricating things ourselves to heighten tension in our country and among our people. This is not just unpatriotic, it's unconscionable. Now, we will do all that we have to do to defend our country. And people, every citizen in this country needs to understand that. Whatever it takes, we will pursue that path, whatever it takes. And we're going to spare no effort in safeguarding every bit of the territory of this country. We're serious about that. That's our commitment to the people of this country. Whatever it takes. We're going to spare no effort. But what will not happen in this government is that we are going to give a ball-by-ball blow of every meeting that we have, every discussion we have, every phone call we make. That's not going to happen, because that's not how you pursue diplomacy. And it seems as though there's a group of people who, in the guise of information sharing, wants us to do that. We're not going to conduct diplomacy, which often is most effective when it's done quietly. We're not going to conduct it in a public manner or from a PR perspective. A lot of discussions have been taking place at the highest levels in this country, among a diverse group of people across many countries and organizations. You have seen the results of it in some of the most robust statements coming out from across the world. From across the world and from major countries. For a country, a small country like ours, which doesn't have a major foreign presence in terms of many embassies, to achieve that degree of success means that we have an active diplomacy that is respected. And to argue about whether it's done by the foreign ministry, the prime minister, the vice president, the foreign minister, the president, is not productive. It's been done by all of the people that I mentioned and others, the technical staff, at various levels. But it's not going to be done in the public domain. So I've seen some calls for more information to be made in the public. A lot of the leaders they don't want their private views to be expressed in the public domain, but they reflect their views in their government's policies. So there was a big controversy about us leaving the country to go to COP28 in Dubai. Now, before COP28, I made it clear that we will be there, but the president shall return at a press conference held right here, that the president shall return before the referendum in Venezuela, which he did. But that was the subject of a major debate in this country when the president left. Now, Maduro could not have gone to COP. The Venezuelan delegation there, we didn't even know if they had a delegation there because they lack profile and nobody wants to speak with them. Unlike in Guyana's case, we went to a gathering where you had most of the world leaders in a single room, and we could have spoken to them one-on-one or their delegations. What's the best forum to advocate for your cause than one where all the leaders are there together? You would not have met them in that manner, in a very informal manner almost. Even if you had worked the phones for days, it was one of the best vehicles for us to pursue our diplomacy and to bring to the attention of the world's leaders, not just our advances on the forest, etc., but also on brief them about Venezuela's aggressive intent to our country and bring a lot of them up to date on how this matter was settled in 1899. A lot of leaders often act on the basis of briefs that they would have seen and read, but they have so many things to do, so they don't pay particular attention to lots or the details of issues. But when you sit across the table and speak it, then they understand the issues. And we use that forum, and not just there, but in New York and many, and our presence abroad, to make sure that we advance the diplomatic efforts, and very, very successfully. You've seen the public images of some of the leaders that we met, but there are many others that there weren't images with at various levels. So here in Guyana, we will work to keep our country safe and our people safe. Our diplomatic efforts are geared towards that. Now, an incessant assessment of whether the GDF has the same capability as the Venezuelan army, it's not helpful. We know that from a very long time, that the size of the Venezuelan army is probably 30 times that of ours, because they have a large population. And they've had more border conflicts with other countries, and they've been a more belligerent nation than we have ever been in the past. In fact, we have a defensive sort of engagement. And our military is built to defend our borders, but we place great store in our diplomacy, as most small countries do, because they don't have the military might or the resources to build up that capability. But one thing is important in this world. It is forging relationships with allies that have greater capabilities and share your strategic interests. And in this case, we have allies who share our strategic interests. They want peace in this region, the entire CARICOM, the entire Latin America, including Brazil, that are prepared to defend peace in the region. We have allies also who will not countenance, because of the lack of democracy in Venezuela, who will not countenance Venezuelan aggression to other countries in the region, who have made it very explicit that in this hemisphere they're not going to allow it. And we have to extend our capabilities on the basis of the defense cooperation with these allies, and we have done so that we can really fulfill what we have said, that should the worst happen, and we don't believe that is going to happen because we've been working to deter it. Deterrence is the best thing in this situation. But should that happen, that we have an extended capability to defend our country. And so we're not as helpless or blowing in the wind as some people would like to think. In fact, we have been robust in all of our engagements, our diplomacy, our fight in the bodies that matter. We're not just going to the Security Council having our case heard. We're becoming a member of the Security Council from 2024. We've gone to the ICJ, and 3 times we have had the ICJ rule, twice on jurisdiction, and now to restrain Venezuela. And they made it clear it's binding in international law that they cannot do anything to alter the situation on the ground. These are solid documents to be fortified with. That ruling by the court, because every member, the court is an allied arm of the United Nations. Every member of the United Nations should respect the binding nature of the ruling of the court. And therefore, we have had great successes so far in almost everything that we've sought. Now, and we are not going to be belligerent. We're not going to be belligerent for the sake of a few people who believe that you have to act up, and that's the best form of defense of your country. Because the ICJ has made it clear too, in the second part of the ruling, that neither of the two parties shall act in that belligerent manner. That is what, to exacerbate tensions on the ground. So we will act in a manner consistent with the ruling of the ICJ and consistent with our diplomacy and national strategy. So we pointed out that Maduro was miscalculating. We believe the referendum was his first miscalculation, that somehow he thought that it can help to enhance his electoral prospects. So the campaign in a wildly had a robust national campaign on an issue that where Venezuelans for over 50 years have been taught in schools that their Essequibo belongs to them. And then he got a dismal, a horrific for him result. Because the Electoral Council in Venezuela pointed out about 50% of the people, the eligible voters, showed up. And not all those who showed up voted yes. So even if you were to believe the Electoral Council in Venezuela and their numbers, it meant that less than half of the eligible voters in Venezuela voted in favor of this referendum. Less than half. And that is based on Maduro's number. Now, every news outlet in the world, the Latin American press throughout the day, was issuing updates. And they believe that these numbers, the turnout figures, were rigged, massively rigged. It's not consistent with the images that they saw during the day. In fact, there is a view in the opposition in Venezuela that the total number of voters who turned out was not 10 million, but 2 million voters. But they add together all the 5 questions, the number of votes times the 5 questions, and that's how they came up with the 10 million figure. But even for a moment, we use Maduro's rigged numbers, turnout numbers. It still was less than half of the eligible voters who voted yes on an issue that everyone knew that if they had gone to a referendum, a yes vote would succeed, because they've been teaching this in school for ages. And that is why the opposition has been saying in Venezuela, why go to a referendum? The answer is clear. People will say yes. So that was the first, I think, disaster for Maduro, that he did not get the turnout and the electoral boost that he thought he will get. In fact, the person who won the primary, Machado, in Venezuela, did an interview, and she pointed this out, and pointed it out that it may have been an effort to distract people from the upcoming elections in Venezuela. And that part of the plan could be that he has this aggressive intent on Guyana, or simply so he could declare that we're now engaged in this conflict with Guyana, and offer that as a possibility for postponing the elections in Venezuela, because he's now realized that on the ground his support has dwindled enormously. So that was said, and then he almost immediately reacted and charged 3 of her people now with treason. This is what happens in Venezuela. 3 persons were charged from Machado's camp for treason almost immediately, because it's not a free country. It's not a free country there. So that was his first miscalculation. Maduro and cannot be trusted. A number of leaders around the world said that he spoke with them, and he said he had no aggressive intent on Guyana. All he was trying to do was to defend the Geneva Agreement. Now, clearly they've been misrepresenting the Geneva Agreement, and we have had to point this out to many people around the world, particularly in Latin America, that the Geneva Agreement nullified the 1899 award. That was not so. We are clear about that in Guyana, but not many others are clear, or some people may not be clear about it. So we've made that very clear now. By the ICJ itself, they said they're looking at the validity of the 1899 award. That is what the ICJ is looking at. And that is what is before the court. It is their contention that the 1899 award was not valid. It was nullified because of fraud, they claim, that they have to prove, that we know they'll be unable to prove. So he says to the people, he's defending the Geneva Agreement. He lies that the Geneva Agreement doesn't provide for the ICJ as a course towards, or a means towards, settlement of the award. Clearly, nobody believes Maduro. The UN Secretary General himself chose this as the final option for the settlement of the dispute. what the dispute that is now described as a dispute, but for us was always a controversy arising from their claim, but now described as a dispute. But this UN Secretary General himself decided that. We are not removing ourselves from that process. Whatever Maduro tries to do, there is no bilateral engagement to decide the validity of the 1899 award any longer. There is only one approach that Guyana is going to pursue, and to its finality, and that's the ICJ. So if he is acting up here with the view that somehow he will get us back to the table for a negotiated settlement, to take us back to the good offices process that lasted 30 years and didn't yield any results, or the mixed commission that didn't yield any results, then he's mistaken if his actions are to force that movement back to that level. So this brings me to the point about whether we're willing to talk to the Venezuelan government. We've made it clear we're always willing to talk to anyone, especially our neighbors. Long after this issue is settled by the ICJ, we would have to live with Venezuela as our neighbors. We want to promote good neighborly relationship with Venezuela. The people of Venezuela have proven that the majority of the people of Venezuela have proven they've seen through Maduro's intent. They didn't show up for his fake referendum. They did not show up for his fake referendum. And we want to have good relations. We are always open to discussion. We believe if you discuss with each other, you can lower tension, you can have a greater understanding of each other's views. But one thing will not happen if he believes that going back to the bilateral level will somehow yield a return to a negotiated settlement. He's mistaken about that matter. The entire world has said now they support the 1899 award as the final award. I saw some strong statement from the British Foreign and Commonwealth offices today. And they said they support the ICJ process. The whole world has support that as a open, transparent, objective means of resolving this issue definitively. We are open to talks anytime with Maduro and his government, but not on that issue. And so if he thinks that the belligerence and threatening Guyana could yield that result to take us back to the bilateral discussions that he hopes that he wants, then he is sadly mistaken. He's sadly mistaken. We're not going to go down that route. So he said to the leaders, I don't have any aggressive intent to Guyana. Many of the leaders said this to us. They say, oh, don't worry. The referendum will be done, and then basically there will be no action on this referendum. So we said, we've seen a very different Venezuela. We believe that Maduro is also desperate, and somehow he miscalculates all the time. He thinks that this could result, or aggressive action could result or yield better results to him. They've assured us, no, it's not so. We spoke directly to him. His lawyer said at the ICJ, Venezuela will not invade Guyana. Venezuela will not take make any incursions into the Guyanese territory. We express some reservations about that. So we've always said the world doesn't believe this. I've seen a lot of the defense, the analysts from around the world, because there are lots of think tanks say he's not going to take any action, but we were always cautious in Guyana. We are always vigilant. We remain vigilant because we don't trust him and we believe he has other kinds of motivations. So when he announced these measures, when he announced the several measures on the 5th of October, I think it was, about setting up or moving to the parliament for an organic law concerning the Essequibo state, and also setting up a political and administrative headquarters in a town close to our border. And then looking at, he wants to study the social attention plan for the Essequibo. He wants to study that, and the most egregious is to create a division within PDVSA and some of his mining companies to explore for oil or give concessions in our territory. And then he threatened companies in Guyana. We believe that this is not just not acting, as all of his assurances that he gave to these leaders. We believe that the true Maduro and his true intent emerged in the public. And a lot of the people were offended that he spoke with, because they believe he's untrustworthy. They believe he's untrustworthy. So, first of all, Venezuela has a difficult time finding food for its people. A lot of people fled there. Why would our people want his social attention plan in Essequibo? It's really ridiculous. What could he offer to the residents of Essequibo if not more hardships? People are fleeing his country because of the disastrous economic policies that he has pursued and the lack of democracy in that country. Who wants more of that? So clearly, he just doesn't, he probably thinks that people in Essequibo are just waiting with bated breath to have him come in here. That's his miscalculation. Secondly, this law has no basis in international law, has no bearing in international law. It's passed by a kangaroo Congress in Venezuela that you would expect them to pass anything in Venezuela. It's a kangaroo Congress that they have there. And so we're not paying any attention to his law, because it has no bearing in international law and definitely will have no respect or even attention from the government and people of Guyana. We don't accept it. It is just another one of his propaganda documents. Now, any attempt to explore for petroleum by his state oil companies or state companies in our territory will be seen as an incursion by Guyana. An incursion and an attempt to alter the situation on the ground contrary to the ruling of the ICJ. And I want to say to the companies that he is given an ultimatum to. They should pay no regard to Maduro or his ultimatum. We will defend that territory as sovereign Guyanese territory in which they operate. They're operating legally, lawfully in this territory. And so we have, because of all of this, because he has changed the dynamics now on the ground by taking these extreme measures or announcing these extreme measures, that is why we have had to pursue the option before the Security Council. And you have seen since then a slew of international condemnation. You have seen the Secretary Blinken issuing a press release last night after talking to the president. There have been lots of other statements you've seen coming out recently, and these will just continue. CARICOM will meet tomorrow too, an emergency meeting of the heads. We will fight this off robustly, and we are strengthening our defense cooperation. We're strengthening this so that should the Maduro try to act on his illegal laws, contrary to the ICJ ruling, that we have a capability for defending our country. So I want to say to the people here, Essequibo or whether you live in Region 1, don't worry unnecessarily. Don't worry unnecessarily. Venezuela is not going to succeed now or ever. They're not going to succeed in this matter. We're going to do everything within our capability and beyond to ensure that this does not happen. And we are not alone in this. In this case, Maduro is pushing against not just international law, but almost the entire international community. He has domestic problems that he is trying to navigate. He has major domestic problems, and in some ways, I think he is using this conflict to deflect from his major domestic problems. But people here, I'm not saying don't follow the news. I'm not saying that people should not be concerned at all. We should all be concerned when we have an unpredictable government who has evil intent on our country. We should all be concerned about it. But don't let the worry paralyze us or cause fear, particularly in our children, etc. These things, they feed on this sort of thing. And you have some really parasitic people in this country who have no regard for our children or anything else. I've scoured the Venezuelan media and their social media a lot. People hate Maduro. They don't like Maduro. But when it comes to their country, they're fiercely patriotic. Fiercely patriotic. Here you have some people who will use this issue as a political weapon to divide our people more and to also cause unease among them. We're not rolling over on this matter. And yes, we are not going to be there. Every night, every day, we have a 24 hours. We're not complaining mode. We are in an enhanced operational mode at every level of this government, every level. Last night, I got in after 12 from the airport. I went to State House. The president was up until 4. I left there after 4 this morning. We're not sleeping on this issue, just treating it as an ordinary issue. It's a major issue, and we're deploying all our forces, and we're in enhanced operational mode. And but we can't be giving ball by ball account. Oh, I just got off the phone with the Secretary of State. I got off the phone with the President. Got off the phone with Southcom. Here is what they said. That's what some people want in this country. And it's not going to happen. So this is something that I'm going to leave the rest for questions on the Venezuela issue. No, I'm not done as yet. I'm not done. I missed last week press conference. I remember I missed last week. I have to make up back for last week. No, today I'm not going to be cussing the haters too much. Today I'm going to stay away from the haters, except one. So I should get that out of the way quickly and then all right, let me just quickly give you an idea of what happened in Dubai, and I'm not going to go for very long because, Komi, can you get some water for me, please? Yeah, like dehydrated, traveling a lot. So you have been following the news from COP28, and in the first couple of days, there was a flurry of activities, a lot of announcements made, pledges made, and there was a hype. If you look at the international media, there was a hype surrounding all of these announcements. And we were very careful about this from the beginning. We've seen this happen before. We've seen that happen particularly in Glasgow. So thanks. So we've seen this happening in Glasgow, where the leaders came in for the first 2 days. And then after the announcements and the high-level speeches were made, they left and the negotiations fell flat. And that is why, even before I left, I spoke about us advocating to return to the old format, the one that we had like in Copenhagen, where the leaders come at the end of the 2 weeks. So they're there to break any or gridlock in the negotiations. And that is how we had that breakthrough with Obama coming there and Hillary Clinton. And there was this pledge of $100 billion per annum for climate funds. That was in Copenhagen. So predictably, we had these announcements. And then now the negotiations have started in earnest on the framework agreement, and already cracks have emerged. And we're going right back to the conflict between fossil fuel producers and those who say you have to end fossil fuel. And the whole nuanced, balanced sort of approach, the just transition that we speak of, has gone out the window. So we're at that stage now. So one of the first announcements has been the loss and damage fund that was created got a pledge of just under $500 million. And it looks a lot of money, but it's practically nothing. Practically nothing. And the worst part of it, they've now handed it over to the World Bank, which is not suitable to intermediate climate funds. Based on history, they've handed it over to the World Bank to determine the mechanism for its disbursement, which will take a long time. Now, just to give you an idea, that the McKinsey recently said that you needed about $600 billion per year in adaptation funding. $600 billion. we're about 1/20th of there. And that is if you generously interpret some of the aid that we get, you're about 1/20th of that now globally. So, and that is what it will take to adapt. Now, considering $400 million when you need $600 billion, that's the gap, the difference in magnitude. And so, although this sounds a lot of money, people hear 400 million US dollars of pledges, and they get excited about it. And I saw some of the same NGOs who are patting themselves on the back, countries saying we have some money there. It's practically nothing. It's practically nothing compared to the needs of these countries. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we, is it in here? Don't worry, it must be just a fire alarm. Well, let them check if there is a fire out there first. I don't want people to say I keep them here when there is if there is a fire. Huh? So the second element of it is the second thing we saw, a big pledge, triple renewable energy by 2030. Now, what would it take per annum to do that? $2.7 trillion. Where is the money? There not only isn't there enough money, but there is no incentive, and that's why we are pushing for a carbon price as an incentive to trigger a large, maybe, exodus of investment away from fossil fuel into renewable energy, because there are added incentives to invest in it. But that, the carbon tax or the cap and trade or the carbon pricing system is nowhere near being agreed to at COP. So it's another pledge to triple renewable energy, but will we be able to achieve it? Then some companies, oil and gas companies, said they will end flaring by 2030. By the way, we have a zero flaring policy in Guyana. They will end flaring by 2030. So when you hear people talk about our flaring here, it's zero flaring. Routine flaring is zero here. And you have to pay a carbon tax, one of the few taxes in the world where oil and gas companies pay for flaring based on the emission level. So that's an advanced feature that we introduced when we got into office in the environmental permits. There is no means of enforcing this. These are voluntary pledges. So we saw a lot of these pledges. I'm not going to enumerate all of them. You just have to go online and check them. But they're not anchored, they're not grounded in the core UNFCCC arrangement. And so that is why they're not going to be measured, and there'll be very little penalty. If you don't measure emissions, then you can't hold people accountable for their targets. And then there's no penalty for not doing what you agreed to. So then many of them will simply not do it. And that is the whole issue now. And so the global stocktake that this of emissions that this COP was supposed to come up with, to look at how we are accomplishing the voluntary pledges made in Paris, that global stocktake will come up with deficiencies. People, we are not off track. We're not on a 1.5 trajectory. And the national, we've seen a reversal of the, maybe non-accomplishment of the targets that many of the developed countries pledge to achieve. But there is no penalty to it. And the leaders have left, and who is going to take the corrective measures? Are they going to say, all right, we're going to enhance the pledge now? to put us on a 1.5 trajectory back again? Or are we going to take further initiatives domestically to bring us back onto the trajectory, enhanced initiative? There's nobody to make that decision there. And that is why, so we're not very optimistic about the overall agreement. So you have made some progress in different areas. I've spoken about markets and how important they are for forest carbon, because the Article 6 that deals with markets and the linking of registries, not making much progress too. And there's a group of people who are opposed to markets for forest carbon. We are saying each country has its own approach to this. Brazil said that you need a $250 billion fund to pay countries now for each hectare of avoided deforestation. If you look at our numbers are going to yield about, if we sell the remaining 70% of our forest carbon at the same price to which we sold the first 30%, we'll raise just over $2.5 billion. We have 1% of the world's tropical forest. If you multiply that by 100, you'll actually get $250 billion. So we think the Brazilian figure is quite realistic, but it's still, there's a big gap between that and the price at which forest carbon is traded, not forest carbon, carbon is traded globally, which is about 90 euros or near 100 US dollars per ton. And on average, we'll get about $20. So we are still, effectively, you're getting a saving of 80% by buying forest carbon at that enhanced price. You're getting an 80% reduction on the price for other carbon that you can buy from the market. And they all have the same impact on the climate. And then they have also, the forest carbon has this other the ecosystem benefits that it brings with it. So we believe that it's a strong argument, but what has happened? So we're heading to get our 2.5 billion because we're looking now to extend this. $2.5 billion for 1% of the world's forest, but our 1% of the world forest would extract from the atmosphere more CO2 than 4 Scandinavian countries, including Norway, Scandinavian countries collectively emit. So that's the size of our forest. Imagine its impact. And that's just 1% of the forest. And we will be able, hopefully, through the market-based mechanism, raise 2.5 billion. The other 99% of the world's forest, if you look at the current offer on the table from public sources, it's less than $2.5 billion they'll be able to raise. So for 99% of the world's forests, they would raise less money through public sources than which we have 1% of the world's tropical forests, will raise through a market-based mechanism. And that is the power. You just have to recognize this as a simple fact. You have to recognize this as a fact and therefore promote a market-based mechanism to outcompete alternate use for the forest and preserve the forest, and still give the countries that have forests an incentive. You don't take away the possibility of economic growth from them, that they don't have to keep the forest like museum pieces for the rest of the world and deny their own people their legitimate aspiration for prosperity. So this is the core of our argument that we have made. And it is solid. We have not had people, you have all kinds of gripers around the corner, but they can't deal with the logic of it because that's factual. Similarly, the logic of the world is increasing its demand for energy and you're not getting more supply from renewable sources. So guess where you're going to get it from? Fossil fuel. And that's a fact of life. So everybody who says cut the fossil fuel, end it now. If you end it tomorrow, what will be the price of fossil fuel? The cost of, well, what would be the cost of energy? It would be 50 times what it is, 20 times what it is today. Who will pay for that? Would the poor countries be able to afford it? So often the debates are counterfactual, but they're very emotive, and you have a lot of waving of flags and stuff, Maduro style, and you don't get the details there. So, but we're pushing. We have our negotiating team there. We have good people there, led by Pradeepa Bolnath and Vanessa Ben. These are two solid technical persons that we have there, our team, and a lot of our staff, and they're pushing to see that the framework agreement is there. I said one thing. I'm not going to play back this thing that Cathy Hughes said about me. So I see Cathy Hughes wants to sue me for $50 million because I called her a lowlife. If you listen to this tape, you would conclude that, and I don't want to play it back again, but the full extent where she called me dangerous, evil, I'm giving away, as a former president, giving away land, a sea channel that she knows is not true, to Venezuela. That offer was made under APNU, and she knows that. I saw Carolyn Rodriguez recently spoke. She was the minister, and she mentioned that when it came to me, I rejected it totally. And so I can go through this, but a very frivolous thing. I mentioned something else. I noticed she didn't say much about that, but I have here, because at the last time I said she could sue me for this matter, and I said she was giving contracts to herself in her ministry when she was minister, to her own company. And I think that's low-life behavior too. So if you go back, please Google the period, and you will see that she said from 2015, when I became minister, I gave up day-to-day operations of Video Mega, her company. I'm going to give you two documents here. One, where she was signing checks on behalf of Video Mega in 2019. And another one where, as minister, she, in her ministry, Video Mega had a contract, and she approved the payment for her own company as minister now. So she's signing on behalf of the company, and then as minister approving the contract. You can have these. I'd leave this on the table here, and you can look at that. I noticed she did not sue me on that. But by the way, since she's getting into the lawsuit, I've instructed my lawyers to sue her for $100 million. I'm doubling the sum for lying on me in Linden, and I can prove that she's lying there. I will go to court and defend the context in which I call her a lowlife. I'll go to court, and before they say they can't find me to serve the thing, I've asked my lawyers to write them already to say we are ready to collect the service. And they can serve it anytime on us. I will defend my position there in court, but then she'll have to defend where she, when I made this offer to Venezuela, unpatriotic offer to Venezuela to give away any part of our territory or the channel, she'll get a chance to prove it in court. I'll prove otherwise. Thank you. I'm not going to go after talk about the other people today. Yes. Because last week I missed dealing with that issue.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jagdeo. Kiana Wilbur, Kaichu
Yeah, would you
News.
like these two documents? I can share them with you, yeah.
Yes, after.
You can ask her about it too.
Has the government's intelligence indicated an increase in Venezuelan presence since the measures by Maduro? And is it government's intention to increase...
I didn't get a card.
Sorry.
Can you please?
Has government's intelligence thus far indicated an increase in presence or the presence of Venezuelan military forces near our borders since the latest measures by Maduro? The second part of that, has government taken a decision to increase our military presence in the neighboring communities near the border?
These are issues that often are determined based on, they don't necessarily, they have to be consistent with our overall strategy and that of our allies. So how best we defend our borders. So it could, I don't want to speculate, but it may not be the best defense, may not be the deployment at an exact location. That it might mean doing something else. So deployment, etc., is a tactical issue. And we best leave that for our advisors and those who are in our military units. They will deal with that issue. As a politician, I don't want to speculate on that. I'm not Maduro who will go and make an announcement, or Irfan Ali is not that. We're moving 4 generals to the border. Like that's what he does. Up to today, he said he's moving 4 new generals to the border. We don't telegraph all of this. We're not telegraphing all of this. I can assure you that we are watching carefully everything that's going on. Today we have a U.S. military aircraft flying over our territory. That's part of finding out what's happening, and our army and our planners will respond accordingly. That's all I'm going to say now. But we don't, we're going to find the GDA for any politician in Guyana telegraphing this. I can assure you, however, that every single movement is tracked. Every single movement that the Venezuelans make, particularly in the proximity of our borders, that is tracked, every single one of them.
Thank you. Secondly, in an effort to protect Guyana's oil interests, has the government asked the UN Security Council for any specific measures in that regard? And in light of what Venezuela has said, can you say if Guyana has intended to have a specific representative at the meeting tomorrow, or we're just waiting to see?
No, so we want Venezuela to comply with the ruling of the ICJ. That is what we want Venezuela to do, comply with the ruling of the ICJ. And it's a simple question before the Security Council. Compliance with the ICJ ruling, which is an arm of the UN, the ICJ. So that is the issue.
Do we have a representative there tomorrow?
We have people on standby.
Okay. Thirdly, can you say if, I know that the government has made it very clear that nothing will stymie our development, but clearly Maduro is showing that logic or good reason can really stray from him at times. So in light of that, is government taking precautions to put sort of a pause, or to not halt altogether, but to just calm some of the discussions you're having on the oil blocks auctions until you have a definitive answer from the UN Council and until we have word from the ICG regarding the defiance?
If we pause any of our development, Maduro succeeds. Maduro has no right in international law to tell the people of Guyana, a sovereign country, how to pursue its affairs. And that is why we are forging ahead with our development in all 83,000 square miles of this country. We are forging ahead. We are working to enhance our program. We're deep in budget preparation. We're not going to be, if we get paralyzed by this as government, then we will fall prey to what he's trying to achieve. So when I said we're in enhanced operational mode, you have a group of the highest level in government dedicated to this issue, but also we're not taking our attention off of what we're elected to do in this country, which is govern and to enhance benefits to people. We're preparing the budget for next year. We're working before the end of the year, the payout would be made, and don't worry with all those people who are speculating about what the salary increases will be, but there will be a payout to the public servants. We're very pleased with the IMF report that came out. It says that at no time in the past or medium-term prospects as good as now for growth and development. It spoke about us containing inflation in spite of a enhanced spending on capital, which is a major task for any government, because you've seen inflation skyrocket for some countries that have dwindling public expenditure. We had a massive increase in public expenditure, a super massive increase in private investments. These would all cause an upward trend for costs, but notwithstanding all of that, and with inflationary pressures, we've contained inflation because of some of the measures that we introduced, and I spoke of these earlier. So we are very pleased with that report. The report speaks about the major steps we've taken to enhance the framework for transparency and management of the oil and gas sector. If you look through that, you will see this is an IMF assessment. They came in, they look at all of our laws in relation to the sector, the petroleum agreement, the petroleum activities bill, the NRF, and they're very pleased with the steps taken to enhance management and transparency in the oil and gas sector. So we're focused on the economy. We're not taking our eyes on the economy, delivering on the social goods, making sure that the 12 hospitals that we're building, they go ahead ensuring welfare for our people. So we're not stopping on those issues. If we do otherwise, we will be Maduro succeeds or our detractors.
Thank you. And two final issues from me. With regard to the Southcom, the flights that will happen today, can we expect this to be something that becomes part of our normal routine in light of what Venezuela has said? And finally, opposition counterparts in Suriname have written to the ICJ about a map that we have showing the New River Triangle. Has this come to your attention as yet, and what's your reaction to it?
I met with both Ramdin, the foreign minister, and President Santoki, and I think President Ali met them too at COP. This is not an issue that we discuss. So we have good relations with Suriname. There the matter is entirely different one. And I don't want to get into that issue now because I think some people are opportunistically trying to use this issue before the ICJ, which had a history as to how it ended up at the ICJ, an almost over 50 years history, with which was built into the agreement, the Geneva Agreement, that ultimately the Secretary General had the right to refer it there, and it was the Secretary General who referred the matter to the ICJ. They're trying to opportunistically use that in the issues over the New River Triangle. So we would not succumb to the opportunism of those people who are trying to exploit this situation.
Flights.
Oh yes, so the engagements will be of a varied nature, and all with a view to making sure that our country remains safe and intact.
Abina Rockcliffe, Guyana Standard. Good afternoon, sir. I understand what is the hope for tomorrow's meeting at the UN Security Council. But regarding the CARICOM heads of state, what is the expected outcome for Guyana? What are you expecting to come out of that meeting? And are you worried at all by those voices in CARICOM who believe that Guyana should return to negotiations? Do you think that they can sway the overall stance of CARICOM?
CARICOM has been very explicit in the statement that the ICJ is the route that will lead to the definitive settlement. So that is a unanimous position. CARICOM still believes, or at least some leaders believe, that we should engage to lower tensions. The government of Guyana has made it clear that any engagement, we're open to engagement. However, that matter that they were so explicit on, that is not a subject of the engagement, because we are not compromising on that position, which is the ICJ route. So many of them, many CARICOM leaders, have been given assurances by Maduro, and he has acted contrary to all of the assurances he gave to many CARICOM leaders. They thought that the referendum will be the end of the matter. So I guess that will be explored tomorrow, and we have to make the point that he is untrustworthy. If he gave many leaders around the region his word, and then that they can't trust him, because many of them reached out saying that would have been the end of the matter. But we are vigilant. We kept our guards up. Because we don't really trust Maduro.
Okay, Venezuela, their position right now, they're almost close to what people might refer to as a pariah state. And still that position hasn't deterred them from this current course of action. Are you concerned that unless the UN Council and other bodies make really stern and hard decisions now, that there's no turning back for Venezuela?
No, often it's the pariah states that take this sort of action. It's not people who are part of a law-abiding international community, respected as democratic nations. It's the pariah states who often take these extreme action. And the only way you can deter them is by, one, hoping that good sense would prevail, but when that doesn't happen, by ensuring that they feel the consequences of their action, and that the consequences could come in various forms. We are not asking the international community or the UN Security Council at this time for any measure apart from the declaration that they must abide by the ICJ ruling.
What sort of reaction did your promotion of the market-based mechanism for the forest yield? The initial reaction, do you think that there was enough support for this at this stage?
For the market-based approach to forests, no, it's not widespread. I think a lot of people still are stuck with the old understanding that you can give a $25 million here to a country that has a forest the size of 5 times that of Guyana, and they would be happy with it and run off and preserve the whole forest. And you're still stuck in that mode in many parts of the world. In some of the NGO communities, as well as some governments, believe that. And it goes back into the justice argument that people in the global north often believe that emission solutions or abatement solutions to climate change that exist in the south can come for free, but those that exist in the north, you have to pay for them. It's almost like an old neo-colonial sort of feeling.
Mr. Jagdeo, Samuel Suknanand, NCN News. You said there will be no pause in development and business continues as usual, but has the government given consideration about the measures affecting foreign direct investment and our local economy? The measures by the Maduro regime?
What measures?
In terms of the statements they've made, setting up a base close to our borders, providing citizenship to people in Essequibo.
No, I saw the translation from Telesur that they are providing citizenship to the people in the town in which they're going to establish this so-called government in Venezuela. What is it called? Tomorrow, right? And so I made that clear. Those are not measures that we particularly care about. He could establish whatever he wants in his country. He could pass whatever law he wants in his country. It's just that we have to ensure that the international community is aware of it, that these laws have aggressive intent. But the law has no place in international law, in international jurisprudence. And therefore, our people I made it clear that any attempt by his companies to start award contracts or to get exploration going in our territory would be seen as an incursion in our territory. So I don't know about what measures you're talking about, can affect our economy or private sector here. Now the local private sector, I've heard some people say they're concerned, etc. But when you sit down and talk to them, they have no real reason to be concerned, But you have a lot of that sort of feeding on each other and on the rumors. We have nothing to worry, and it should not affect local investments.
Naomi Paris, Guyana Chronicle. On the topic of COP, can you say if any key points came out regarding the agriculture sector role in combating climate change?
Yeah, well, often you look at agriculture and forestry together. So it is like deforestation and land use degradation or land degradation, because in some parts of the world, agriculture leads to degradation of the land. And what that does is that it often liberates carbon trapped in the soil carbon into the atmosphere. Agriculture generates a lot of methane too, particularly in the raising of animals, cows. They generate a lot of methane. But I think putting the bigger sources of emissions are left unattended than to focus on trying to constrain agriculture now. Or clearly some practices that are harmful to the environment should be changed. We have to work carefully to make sure you don't have more desertification, because more prudent use of water resources, particularly in areas that are water stressed. Almost 2/3 of the world now are water stressed. In fact, more than 2/3 of the world are water stressed. So you have to be careful. But the key issue out of COP is to have a solid framework agreement with ambitious targets, a mechanism to measure compliance against those targets, and a way of penalizing countries for not achieving the targets, particularly the big countries, the rich countries of the world. Because what we find that we get more lectures from them, and when you look at the real policy, they avoid a closer examination of the domestic policies. So this year, the United States has produced the most oil of any country in the world. The highest production of oil has come out of the US. The United Kingdom has licensed a large number of over 100 operations for exploration for oil. They have licensed some new coal-fired power plants. So you have some people saying we must end unabated coal. Now, no more new coal-fired power plants. And then you have some countries that would have a progressive view on one matter, then doing exactly the opposite in relation to coal. So there are lots of issues you have to navigate, but agriculture, I know it's discussed, but it's not something that where you can have the greatest savings on emissions to achieve net zero. It's many of the other areas, the deforestation. Just imagine if the amount of carbon that the forest sequesters. I just pointed out 1% of the forest can take out the equivalent of 4 Scandinavian countries. Just imagine we've lost over the past maybe 30 years or so, about 50% of the world's forest. Just imagine if you can restore that. And the amount apart from the storage, which is 19.5 gigatons of carbon now in our forests, the annual emissions that it sucks out of the atmosphere, the CO2, could be equivalent to all the growth in emissions for the next 20 years. If you can restore forests back to where it was, say, 40 years, 50 years ago, globally, the same forest cover that we've had. So, and you can do it more cost effectively, and I think with greater impact for water, fresh water. Forest has a big impact on rainfall management, on biodiversity, a whole range of things. You can restore biodiversity. You saw the president's speech about how much we have lost in this region, I think 6 to 9% from 1970 to to now 6 to 9% of our biodiversity.
Mr. Jagdeo, good afternoon. Sharda Bacchus from the newsroom. The government had purchased some equipment, including transformers and so on, for the Guyana Power and Light, and they were expected to arrive early this month. Once installed, they are expected to rectify the issue of power outages in the country. Could you say whether these equipment arrived in the country?
No, there's the transformers, the power plant, about 30 megawatts, yes. So we saw, when we were at COP, I saw this, that there was a delay. And we called and we asked what's going on. And they said there were some issues where some of the transformers might be delayed because they were caught up in shipping. But we are told that GPL has transformers that they can use to have these units installed. And we're told that they would be ready by the 15th or so. What's today's date? 11 to the 15th, that these would be fully installed. That was the position we got from GPL and from Minister Indar calling from COP. So I got back only this morning, so we'll have to verify. But we expect that they would be operational, and that would add about 30 megawatts to the system.
Does this include the generators also?
Yes, the transformers are the generators have to arrive, so the transformers are what make them work. And also, if you get the generators without the transformers, you can't install them, you can't bring them into the grid, the power into the grid. So we anticipate, they told us definitively that this would be done between the 11th to the 15th.
Dr. Jagdeo, Antonio de Sabrudus. I have a question. You raised concerns about the threat from Maduro, Venezuelan President Mr. Maduro. He is saying that these oil companies have up to 3 months to vacate the territory. Has any of the oil companies
The answer is no. The answer is no, and they should ignore him. That's what I'm saying. Ignore him. Just ignore Maduro. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. Sorry, Davina
I'm
Bagat.
sorry, that was a short answer.
Good afternoon, sir. Davina Bagat with Kaiser News. Just 2 questions from me. In light of the threats from Venezuela, with the 3 months notice again, can you say what is being done to protect the FPSOs in our EEZ and our oil and gas operations from any illegal action that may be taken by Venezuela?
Yeah, well, that's part of, we're preparing to defend our country and every bit of our sovereign territory. That includes the exclusive economic zone too. So we're not going to only defend the oil and gas interests of the country. We're defending our whole country and all of its assets and investments. Next thing you'd hear, we're only defending the FPSO, that would be the TikTok. We're defending the FPSO and we're not defending our people. We are prepared to defend our country and the exclusive economic zone and all of the assets contained therein. That is what we're working on.
Okay, but would there be any sort of heightened security around the area?
What do you mean? Heightened security only for the FPSOs?
No, in our marine territory, would there be any heightened...
I just told you we're prepared. We're defending our entire territory, land and water, and all that's within it. That's it.
Okay, finally from me, sir. Can you provide an update on the insurance for the gas to energy, the pipeline component of the project, given these concerns from Venezuela?
Not now. I've seen also some of the lies that Kaichor been telling. They found their way into the Venezuelan propaganda machinery. It's the same nonsense about how we're in Exxon's pocket and etc., and that Guyanese don't benefit from the oil and gas present. That's the biggest Maduro selling point. And it's a utter nonsense that has gone on here for a long time. I've dealt with insurance issues, etc., 100 times. I'm not dealing with that anymore. We're dealing with the defense of our country, and that's important now. I've dealt with that issue already. At the appropriate time, I told you a long time back, at the appropriate time, every asset that we have, including a pipeline, the power plant, and the NGL facility, will have the insurance at the appropriate time.
Just
Yes.
to that point that you brought up just now, Maduro saying that Guyana is in Exxon's pocket. I noted an interview with Darren Woods where he said that Exxon has not given Guyana a cent to safeguard its territorial integrity and all of this that it's going on. I just want you to confirm if...
Yeah, they've made it clear that this is an issue between states, and they're here to deal with their business. It's our country. It's not Exxon's country. It is our country, and we have to defend all of its assets. Every bit of the territory, land and sea, and all of our assets, and most importantly, our people. All of our people. That's our responsibility. It's not Exxon's responsibility. It's not anybody else's. We are forging alliances to do that, to defend all of our territory. But the oil and gas resources that the Maduro covets now too, he made a mess of their situation there that they covet, that they belong to the people of this country. They belong to the people of the country, the assets. And nobody is in Exxon's pocket. Here, a bad agreement was struck in 2016, and I said in Essequibo, because this is a democracy, we can discuss this. We can discuss this, that this agreement is flawed, it's lopsided, but we can also, as a people, say we will not alter this agreement because it would affect the momentum of the investments in a net zero situation. And two, there are some implications for our credibility as a country that protects investment, the sanctity of contract. Venezuela doesn't have sanctity of contracts. That's why all the investors fled Venezuela. They have no sanctity of contracts. They nationalized people's property, and the country, you had a slump. They were producing 3 million barrels a day. They slumped to under 1 million barrels a day. Soon we'll overtake them in our production, and that's for a massive country. Every foreign investor fled the country because of the lack of sanctity of contracts and capricious action. But we here, we live in a free country. You can't defend that. You can't say something against the government here because you will probably get charged for treason too, like some of the people up to yesterday got charged for treason. Here in Guyana, people come up with all sorts of craziness. They can say all sorts of things. You can put it on TikTok. You can do whatever. You don't get charged for criticizing the government, even when it's a lie. 90% of the time, Glenn Lal doesn't know what he speaks of. He lies. But you see him every day, healthy and fine, spewing the lies. And I said that if we were in the pocket of Exxon, we wouldn't have allowed that. We wouldn't have this tolerance to do this. So we live in a free country, and we should appreciate that. And we can criticize, which he can do. But he is now using this as his big thing in the Caribbean. And I see some people repeating this, and when you look at the source, guess the primary source is the Kaichur News and Glenn Lal. Well, Guyana mainly. And this is not just unpatriotic. It is, if it had a modicum of sensibleness to it, some of these things, then I would say fine. But sometimes it's so inane. It's unbelievable that any self-respecting person would think that, you know, any reasonably person who uses their head reasonable would believe a bit of it. It just boggles my mind. We're not afraid of robust criticism and proper analysis, but it becomes repetitive. Oh, so they know our position on the contract, the Stabroek block. But every time, are you going to ring fence? You're going to ring fence. Oh, we answered that question a million times. And why? Why? You can't. So this is it. Yeah, please.
Kiana, again, just two quick questions, and I want to take the conversation regionally a bit. Trinidad and Tobago is pinning a lot of its hopes on the Dragon gas deal with Venezuela. Given what is taking place between Guyana and Venezuela, what key lessons do you think Trinidad should take into account regarding this business partner it's getting into bed with?
This country is not, the Maduro and his regime, they're not trustworthy. They're not trustworthy. And the Trinidad would have to be extremely cautious in engaging them. They're not trustworthy. And we will, should Maduro pursue these crazy plans any further, and he miscalculates once again, we will be pushing for sanctions again, too. Because you wouldn't think, I think Maduro got some reprieve on that issue with Trinidad and Tobago because CARICOM wanted, at the request of Trinidad and Tobago, to see the development take place. So they got that reprieve there. But it's not going to be business as usual if he allows himself to be misguided once again and does anything that will go against the ICJ ruling.
But your overall message to Trinidad is to be extremely careful.
Extremely careful with, yes, the regime. They're not trustworthy.
Now, I know a lot of the conversation has been fixed on the implications for Guyana should Maduro continue along this reckless path. But this is not just a Guyana issue, it's a regional issue. Mm-hmm. Can you help to put into context what is really at stake, not just the peace of the region, but economically? What is at stake if Maduro continues with this sort of reckless or behavior, the desperate acts he's been going on with?
Yeah, the situation, you've seen Brazil, and they're very strong on this. We spoke with Celso at COP, and you've seen President Lula's position on this issue. Brazil wants this region to remain an area of peace. CARICOM wants the same thing. Almost every Latin American country. I think Maduro has miscalculated that given what is happening in Ukraine and now Gaza and Palestine, that enough attention, robust attention, will now be paid to his imperial ambitions here in Guyana. But I think he is miscalculating. Because if the United States of America took a strong position against Russia. When Putin annexed Crimea, at least the people of Crimea voted. Here you have a situation where he is saying that they're voting to annex a part of our country. They're not even living in Guyana, and they're voting to annex. This is even worse. So the world has to be consistent, particularly the United States and other countries that have opposed Russia's annexation of parts of Ukraine. They have to be consistent in this hemisphere, particularly in this hemisphere. And he probably thinks that it is not going to happen, but it is happening, because I know when you speak to the leaders from the developed world, and we have spoken to them at this senior levels, they see this point. So we have been fortunate in that we have a lot of regional partners in CARICOM and Latin America who have been robust in their criticism of Venezuela. I've seen some former heads of government of Latin America and even Spain robust in their criticism of Maduro, but still want peace, which is what we want. That is why we said we're willing to engage to lower tensions. We want the region to remain peaceful, because having a region that is peaceful helps with the flow of investments to the region. It helps with also even interest rates. And capital tends to move away from places where you have big instability. And nobody wants that to happen in this region, in the Latin American, Caribbean region, because these conflicts have a way of spilling over to other areas.
Finally, from me, do you think what is
And
taking
it
place
also
with...
adds to the premium that people pay for loans and a whole range of stuff in different areas.
Thank you. Finally, from me, there is the perception of some stakeholders that what is playing out with Venezuela could be a ploy to get Guyana to be in breach as well of the ICJ's ruling, as well as to distract from the substantive case. How does Guyana intend to navigate that delicate balance of defending itself but not being in breach?
This is precisely what I spoke of at the beginning, that you're not going to see belligerence from us. But it doesn't mean that we're pushover or we're not exploring every possibility. So we have to ensure that we don't do the same thing that Maduro is doing. Sometimes I get a bit concerned or upset when people say, oh, both countries should observe the peace and keep the region peaceful. We're not threatening the peace of this region, but we're very conscious of the ICJ ruling that says both parties have to act in a manner that doesn't raise tension. And that is why we're saying we'll defend ourselves, but we're open to talk about any other issue except the ICJ process and where it will end to deal with the substantive issue. So we're walking that tightrope, and that is why people here have to understand that you can't pursue public policy in a PR manner. I see these social commentators, and every day they have an opinion on everything. They're specialists on military operations. Today, someone said to me we should join NATO. the people, they have a view, and many of them live abroad, by the way. Many of them are not here in Guyana. They're overseas, but they've become specialists on everything. So we have to ignore them totally. In fact, they intend more on causing confusion amongst our people than trying to be helpful. If they had turned their attention to Venezuela and Maduro, who is the real aggressor here, then we'll probably be in a little better position.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Mark Besant, Senior Multimedia Investigative Journalist from CCN TV6 in Trinidad. If all else fails tomorrow, would Guyana be looking at the United Kingdom and the United States in curtailing Maduro's intentions here in the Essequibo region?
So what do you mean by if all fails tomorrow?
Okay, so the United Security Council comprises of 5 permanent members, 2 of which are China and Russia, who have favorable ties with Venezuela. And of course, the vote must be unanimous in terms of having all 5 vote. They must not veto, and you must have 9 out of 15, correct?
Yes.
So if there is in some way a loggerhead there, what will be Guyana's next step?
So we believe that every member of the Security Council, the permanent and non-permanent members, they believe they're part of the United Nations process. So they have to respect the ruling of an agency that is part of the United Nations umbrella, which is the ICJ. The ICJ gave provisional measures. They said these measures are binding on parties. We believe that all of the members, including those that you mentioned, would have to support the provisional measures of the court, which is a UN body. And so we don't want anything else except that Venezuela complies with the ruling of the ICJ, which is that the status quo be not altered until the substantive issue is determined. And so that we expect unanimous support. But we will work with all of our partners, including the United States of America, to ensure that if Venezuela defies the ruling of the court and every other international organization, which they are prone to do, then they infringe on our territory or try to alter the status quo that prevails now based on the 1899 arbitral award, then we just have to defend our country with our partners.
You were speaking earlier about economic investment, and of course, there are a number of multinational corporations existing here, especially in the Essequibo region. Is the U.S., on the invitation of the government, going to allow their multinational corporations to also enter that region?
We don't invite people based on nationality. If all of this is sovereign Guyanese territory, the Essequibo, and our exclusive economic zone, we know it. The boundaries have to be definitively drawn, but we don't believe it would be altered significantly. And so the exploitation of resources in our exclusive economic zone is part of the policy of our government and has always been the policy of all governments in Guyana. So any company with the approval of the government, with the permitting of the government of Ghana, could operate in these areas, either on land or in sea. But not necessarily, we're not going to hunt down American multinational corporations to say, you come only to the Essequibo and stuff. We don't need to do that. Any company.
Now, with President Maduro's latest extension to his map, I spoke with a couple of senior security officials here in Guyana over the last couple of days. And the threat of the syndicatos is real. We've seen it in Venezuela, where they are controlling gold mines. They're actually warring against the military and other factions. How concerned is the Guyanese government with that extension that Maduro has pushed allegedly to the Essequibo region of the syndicatos coming into that area and extorting people with mines and so on there? How concerned?
Well, there is, as we said, we don't recognize any extension of their map. To do so would be to admit that the 1899 award was flawed. And so our position is that it's illegal. What he has done is illegal, but it's not unpredictable because they've always had this area as part of their map, but as zona en reclamación. So we know what our borders are, and any incursion by anyone, including from criminal gangs, will be dealt with by our security forces. And so we are watching this carefully. There's some real views that the majority of the migrants here who have come, they're peace-loving people, freedom-loving. Many of them are Guyanese, but there could be people here who have ill intent to our country. So we're not turning a blind eye to that, too. Our security forces are looking at that. We're looking at every possible threat to our country and our people, wherever they come from, or which can be exploited by the Maduro regime.
Finally, I know you spoke earlier on about the helicopter incident, and I think I've just got some news, and I also saw from a news outlet, but I got somebody who sent me some information personally, confirming in some measure that at least 5 of the officers, they have been found deceased. But I don't know if you would like to check to get an idea of, because it's on a news site as well as some would have sent it.
No.
Onward.
There were 7 people on the ground. I don't want to speculate because you have a lot of families out there who are worried. This is not a matter that you speculate on. People are just glued now for news to the television and everything else for the news of their loved ones. I had a disturbing call yesterday. I was in New York from one of the persons who I know very well. Inconsolable. And so I'm not going to speculate on this matter. But from what I was told earlier, that at the sighting, they thought they saw 4 persons who were waving. And we're keeping our fingers crossed because there are 7 persons there. We're hoping that maybe everyone is alive. But they saw 4 persons. That's the initial report, that 4 persons were waving at their aircraft. And so that's all I'm going to say now. That was what I was told by the GDF. So I just checked. I didn't see an update. I'm not going to speculate on that.
Fair enough. Lastly, I know the CDS would have spoken yesterday of the malfunction of the helicopter. Has a preliminary report in any measure been handed in terms of...
Who said about malfunctioning of the
Sorry,
helicopter?
the CDS spoke about a signal, being sent out.
Yeah, no
The
malfunctioning
ELT.
of
My
helicopter.
apologies for that. But has an initial report been sent in to the CDS and by extension?
Because of that signal, they knew the area. That is why it narrowed the search. And all of the assets were deployed from very early in the morning. As I told you, I left State House after 4. The president was just waiting. After 6 o'clock, we were waiting for the search to resume. And early in the morning. And I believe because of that signal, they managed to narrow the search. The weather was a problem yesterday and even today, because even when they noticed the aircraft on the ground, the helicopter on the ground and the people, the weather was not allowing them to rappel down the special forces to get down to the site. And that's all we know now. So I'm not going to speculate about this matter. The Guyana Defense Force and the government will put out an official statement. Since I came in the press conference, the last person I spoke to was the Chief of Staff coming in here. I don't have any update on it, and he will give an update to the Defense Force. Thank you. And stuff like that.